So I'm actually walking around outside to find voices to put on the podcast. Maybe I should just go into a store like this, like a music store.
Hi there.
Hello.
How are you?
Hi, I'm recording. Can I ask you a question?
Sure. Do you want a correct answer?
It's not Jeopardy.
Dang.
Have you ever heard of a online universe called Second Life?
I have, but I don't do online universes.
Uh-huh. Why not, and what have you heard about it? Those are two questions that may be related.
I don't have time. I don't have a high enough internet connection to do anything like that at home. I have a real life. I don't need a second life. I have a first life that's too busy to be a second life, so
Right, you have a first life, but you're using Facebook.
once in a while.
Can you say the station ID, if you will? You're listening to the Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley.
Drax Files Radio Hour?
Yeah, you're listening to the Drax Files Radio. That's the name of the podcast.
No, I'm listening to Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley!
Thank you! All right, hello there, and welcome to the Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley. My name is Draxter Dupre. We're here in 1920s Berlin in Second Life. Hi, Joe.
Hello.
So today's show, big stuff, as you heard in the station ID. I went out into real life on the streets to find locals commenting on Second Life, and I bumped into the co-owner of Bookmark Sheep Music here in town, and we will hear the entire exchange later on in the show.
Yeah, she made you work for your Lindens.
Later in the show, also, Nick Yee, a researcher currently at Ubisoft. He did fascinating work at Stanford back in 2007, and his recent article in Slate, Virtual Worlds Are Real, sparked some great discussion. We'll be talking about avatar identity and what engagement in virtual worlds reveals about humanity and so on and so forth. We also have a new Drax Files video, episode 17, featuring a 21-year-old Second Life entrepreneur. Our giveaway winner, the Humanoid Animations Couples Dance Ball, $3,200 Linden dollar value. Lots of people wrote in with the right answer, keyframe animation, and motion capture. And the lucky winner is Uccello Poultry.
Yay.
Congratulations, Uccello.
Congratulations. That's a good prize.
We have another giveaway in 1 week. It will be huge, Joe. It will be small, but at the same time, it will be huge. I'm talking about our new sponsor.
Trust me, you'll want one of these.
They make physical goods, not virtual merchandise. All right, the top topics. Private estates in Second Life are growing by 15 regions this year.
Yes, for the first time in a year, week after week, the amount of regions in Second Life is growing. And that is news, because for over a year, every month we've been hearing it's -10, it's -20 regions. Second Life was getting smaller and smaller, and now all of a sudden it's +15. I think people are already calling it the Ebbe effect. And is it because of him? A new positive feeling going through the virtual community.
And he's communicating the heck out of this with residents.
Yeah, this guy talks too much. I wish the CEO wouldn't communicate so much.
I think residents need to make up their mind what they want in their leadership.
Even some of the most cynical users of Second Life, and there are loads of those, are cautiously optimistic.
And Marianne McCann, our good friend, she wrote a great blog post that we linked to Dear Ebbe. She made an awesome snapshot because obviously the robot that Ebbe looks like very much like the Iron Giant from the Iron Giant animated movie. I don't know if that's IP violation. Mm-hmm. Joe, I wanted to also ask you, because you've been blogging about this. Ebbe has said the orientation experience is not good enough, and he pledged to make this his number one priority. We know that Second Life is being tried by about 500,000 folks every month. We are putting the call out now. Call us on Skype, Drax Files, and tell us, how can Linden Lab make the orientation experience, the onboarding experience in Second Life better? Give us your ideas.
Well, the great thing about Ebbe, what he's been doing so far, is that he has actually tried. He has been a noob himself. He's signed up, so he knows it is not all intuitive. And I think that perhaps it's a good idea to build something on the Second Life website, some sort of tutorial. Every game has one these days. Figure out the basics. You can do that before you even start your viewer. When you try it now, you are teleported into the middle of nowhere. You have no idea where you are. If you're unlucky, you go to a place where there are other people who are very experienced, some of them being griefers, shouting at each other through their microphones. There's loud music in the background. People are perhaps rude. There are some avatars that may scare you. Not a nice way to start Second Life. Help these people find a location where they want to go.
And let me jump in real quick, because I think Ebbe at a press conference made a very important point that I admit, I forget. Not everybody is a creator. Not everybody wants the blank canvas. You can have a fantastic experience just wandering around inside other people's imagination. To separate, I guess, the wanderer from the hardcore creator, I guess the hardcore creator may not be the problem, or maybe he is, because I have spoken to creative folks who had no idea that everything in Second Life is user created, for instance. That stuff is also not very well communicated.
It is all a bit overwhelming when you see all those buttons, all those options, and you get teleported into a hub and you arrive at a place where you really don't want to go, and the search system doesn't work properly. Get people to see destination guide, make them find something that they're interested in even before they start the viewer.
What do you think about human resources? I think this cannot be accomplished without hiring people that are there and holding other people's hands once they're in world.
I don't think everyone needs help. If you understand the basics, walking and chatting and interacting with things, the second you find a good place, you're okay. Because when I found my first sim that I actually liked, which was Flashman's, a sort of 1930s, 1920s French bar, the second I walked in there, I found people that shared my interests. I found a place that I liked. So I started hanging out there, and I met people who were willing to teach me, because that's how you find friends. And if you're in a place that you like, things like that go automatically. You'll figure it out. You want to figure it out.
What does the tourist administration of Amsterdam do with stoner jerks who run around downtown and scream and behave really nasty? Are they putting off people? I mean, what I'm trying to say here. I mean, is that an analogy to Ahern?
Problem is not that there are people like that in Second Life. I mean, you can't hide them. You will eventually bump into people who are annoying. But they're not everywhere. There are. If you find the hubs, the places where you get sent to if you're a noob, you crash or whatever, when you don't have a home yet, that's where a lot of these people are. That's where they hang out. If you find a place that you like, the chances of, grievers or annoying people being in every sim all over Second Life are a lot smaller. If you go to Second Life and the first thing you look for is a 1920s sim and you come to 1920s Berlin, chances of you getting into trouble with anyone except one of us who already lives there are really, really small.
Yeah.
We don't have griefers and people half naked hanging around there bothering new people.
Yeah, and if indeed you type that into a search engine, but unfortunately then 50 different locations for brothels come up, that is a problem. That's the search problem you alluded to.
I think everyone agrees that search is not quite working as it should, but we have a pretty decent destination guide. Destination guide is already on the Second Life website, so why not connect it to that very first new user experience? Hello, this is your tutorial. When you finish it, pick your first destination guide, and that's where you will teleport the second you start up Second Life for the very first time.
We need to press on because we have so many topics left. I need to mention Bitcoin because, Joe, you and I don't understand Bitcoin at all. There was a thing in the news, big Bitcoin exchange is offline, and someone has most likely stolen $350 million in Bitcoins. I called Carl Stiefvater, formerly Carl Linden. He was on the line with me yesterday to enlighten us about Bitcoin and virtual currency. It's fascinating stuff, and you might be surprised what he has to say. how Bitcoin actually relates to cash. Here's Carl Stiefvater.
There's a maximum number of Bitcoins that'll ever be produced. And when they're stolen, they'll still be in circulation. Presumably the thieves want to use them, so they'll come back. But as far as them being safe, that is really not true. They're exactly like leaving cash out on your desk. You're at work, you leave cash out on your desk, you come back and it's gone. You're not that surprised and it's exactly the same with Bitcoin. They're very much like cash. When they get away from you, you have no recourse to get them back. So if you leave them in your computer, you might think they're safe, but hackers get into computers all the time.
So in connection with this Mt. Gox Bitcoin exchange, the news reports are talking about a bubble. They're talking about a Bitcoin bubble, about something that is just a fad or a bubble. How do you see this?
I think the technology is very valuable. I think it or something very closely related to it will continue to be used by everyone for the rest of time. But it is at the same time absolutely a fad, right? Because as people see these things go up 10 times in value, they're like, not even knowing the technical aspects of it, they're like, well, I want a piece of that. So they buy it. And then when something scary happens, like happened this week, they just turn right around and sell it. So the price is very volatile. It goes way up and way down. I guess my answer is sort of quantum. It is both a fad and not a fad at the same time.
Yeah, you said that something like this. Do you mean that we will all use a virtual currency to do transactions at some point, right? That's what you're trying to say.
I will say that it will remain profoundly useful. It might be more convenient for everyday people to just use their credit cards.
Why is the credit card not considered virtual currency? It's just nomenclature, I suppose.
Right. The Bitcoin currency has some properties that make it really nice in some situations.
Which are?
It's peer-to-peer, which means if you're trying to... Well, there are lots of nefarious ways to use it, but let me try to find some that aren't. One peer-to-peer technology, Freenet, is used in China so that Chinese dissidents can communicate with each other despite the fact that their government is trying to prevent them from communicating with each other. And in the same way, Bitcoin will allow these people to send money back and forth. That's one of the things that makes it useful. Another thing that makes it useful is that there's no real way for someone to control it. Any government or, so those, even good actors can't control it, but it keeps bad actors from controlling it too. WikiLeaks is an example, but, it's not a good example because people have mixed feelings about WikiLeaks. But regardless, WikiLeaks was unable to receive donations for a year because they got shut out by the credit card companies, right? And so if, for example, there is some organization in the future that we like that we don't want to be able to be shut down by Visa, there will be a way to send donations without anyone like Visa or the US government stopping it. Technically, it's interesting because no one thought there would be a way to solve this problem. There would be no way to send money from here to there without having a third party confirm it or control it in some way, and that problem has been solved.
So now are the big financial institutions, Visa and so forth, and the big banks, are they happy that there's negative news about Bitcoin? Are they going to capitalize on that, or do they really not care at this point?
I would guess that it's too new for anybody to seriously care. And the community is chock full of wackadoodles.
Wow, that does sound like the Second Life.
Yeah, there are a lot of overlaps with Second Life, that is sure.
Speaking of Second Life, what's the difference between Linden Dollar and Bitcoin? I mean, obviously Linden is controlled. I mean, it's controlled by one company.
That's precisely the difference. Linden Lab controls the Linden Dollar, and they print new Linden Dollars anytime somebody wants to buy one from them. Because of that, the exchange rate between Linden Dollars and US dollars has been fixed for years.
Linden Lab is like the virtual Alan Greenspan.
Well, actually, they're more like the Chinese government. They force an exchange between the yuan, the Chinese yuan, and the dollar. And so they force that exchange rate, and Linden Lab is very much like that. for better or worse.
The comparison with the Linden dollar obviously also comes up in the context of remember that big run on the ATMs. I don't recall the detail, but what I recall is that there were several Second Life banks. They offered you to put money, and then you could retrieve it in an ATM. And then at some point, the guy who programmed the ATMs across the grid just took out a couple of million and left.
Yeah, and that is not too dissimilar from what happened with Mt. Gox this last week.
Wait a minute. So the thief cannot cash this out easily because it's almost like stealing a Rembrandt or a Chagall or something.
What?
I'm talking about art. I know you're American, so you don't know what I'm talking about.
Exactly. I have no idea. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Because they're all marked, it's hard to
go to some guy and says, hey, can you cash this out? And he goes like, oh, no, you're a thief. I'm going to call the cops.
Exactly. Yeah, and there have been some services being set up to do that. Like if your coins get stolen, then you enter them here, and then the community can track them. And if someone tries to spend them, then they get caught.
So thanks, Carl, for giving us the background on Bitcoin. Joe, what is new on the hardware front? You're collecting links. I heard about Oculus starting their own convention. I heard about Oculus not getting the components that they need. And I heard about exclusive Oculus games.
Yes, there is a world outside of Second Life, quite right. Oculus, they've trademarked the name RiftCon, and it has a description that clearly shows an exhibition all about the Oculus Rift and the user of it. Why it's not even on sale public yet.
I remember there was a Second Life community convention, but so what is up with the components that are not being delivered?
Well, it is some sort of strange rumor that I've picked up on The Guardian, which is quite a good British newspaper, and they've been writing about the Oculus a lot.
The Guardian is almost as reputable a news source as this podcast.
Almost, yeah. Well, apparently they're selling so many that the shipping of the development kits is in such a huge scale. They had to be suspended because they are running out of parts to make it with. But the source is anonymous, so take with a grain of salt.
And what is up with the exclusive Oculus Rift game? Is that some sort of package deal when it comes out? So it lies out there at Target, Costco, a Rift plus the super game, right? Packaged all in one?
I'm not quite sure how it will work in the end. The idea is that Valkyrie, which is a science fiction shoot game, will be part of the Oculus Rift when you buy it. So maybe they give you the game CD with it, or maybe it's an install, or I don't know, a Steam voucher. I don't know how they're going to do it, but it will come with the Oculus Rift. And this, of course, would be fantastic if Linden Lab would somehow manage to get Second Life mentioned in the box with the Oculus Rift.
Right. Linden Lab have a deal where the Oculus Rift at Costco, at the checkout counter, there's a box with the Oculus, and there's a coupon in there, a 10,000 Linden dollar coupon, right? To buy and landmarks to 1920s Berlin.
Yeah, cool.
A coupon at Sonata Morales store and
something like that, or at least get it mentioned in the voucher or in the instruction manual. Welcome, congratulations on buying the Oculus. Here are a few games that you can play for free. And if you want to try a virtual world and build your own thing, try Second Life, whatever, get it mentioned.
Right. If you're tired of lame first-person shooters, build your own lame first-person shooter.
I love lame shooters. No, I'm not shooting lames.
There's so much more on the hardware front. Everybody and their dog seems to be developing a competitor to the Oculus Rift. There's an Italian or a Spanish company out there. Anyway, in a few weeks, we have Ben Lang scheduled, a reporter for the Road to VR blog, and he will give us the total ultimate overview of where the state of affairs is, where we are with the hardware. Let's move on to our new feature segment called What Do the Locals Think?
Oh, dear.
So I went out and I interviewed Pamela from the local sheet music store, and boy, was I in for a deep intellectual debate about what is real and what is not. I encourage our listeners also to grab, if they have, a mobile recording device, go out, interview a man, a woman on the street, ask them, have they heard about SL? What do they think about it, etc. Mail us the audio. We will play it. So here is Pamela. Enjoy me sweating, stuttering, and losing the argument.
I've only heard about it. I don't know anything else about it because I get little notes from people saying, help me with Second Life and do this. And I'm like, well, I have a
They're
real
asking
life.
you?
Well, on every once in a while I have a Facebook notification says, for Second Life.
What would happen if I tell you that Second Life is actually a universe? It's like a blank canvas, a room where you could do whatever you want, where you can create art and sell it to other people, where you can have galleries, where there's cutting-edge filmmaking, music, and collaboration with the entire world. There's that phone. Cross-cultural collaboration. You could talk and interact and create with someone from Egypt as if that person would be here, just as an example.
I already have a lot of creative things I do outside of my work environment.
And those creative things that you do, would you be interested in sharing those with other people outside of Pacific Grove?
I already do.
How do you do that?
I knit and I belong to a knitting guild and I send stuff to people in Sweden. And I talk to people that are from all over the world through knitting. And I also am a harpist, so I play for other people outside of Pacific Grove. But I don't live in Pacific Grove.
No, I understand. What would you say if I were to tell you that you could knit with other people in real time and you could see them and you could sit actually on a replica of a beach or in a spaceship while you're knitting and you see yourself knit and it happens
okay, I gotta stop you. It's still a fantasy world. It's not real. You're not really talking or touching or interacting with them or feeling their knitting. You can't feel somebody's knitting if you're in a world that I can walk over in my knitting groups and look at their doing, touch their fiber, see what they're doing. If it's their hand spun,
can you do that with someone in Colorado? That person also sits at home, and after hours.
But why would you want to sit by yourself at home to interact?
No, I don't want to sit. I don't want to sit by myself.
I understand, but that's what Second World is. You're sitting by yourself at home, virtually interacting with somebody else that's not around you, but you're not really interacting with them. You're doing it. You're not face to face. If I was doing this, I know the difference. If you were sitting and I knew that you were a virtual person somewhere else, it's not the same to me as sitting, talking to you straight and seeing your face and seeing the eyes and seeing, what you have on.
Right.
Because what you have on may not be you. It may be something you've created.
Exactly.
And
something that is inside of me. Something.
But I can already see what's inside of you.
You can?
Yeah.
How about a person that lives 15,000 miles from their loved ones? How should they interact with the phone?
Well, they have Skype. They have other ways to do it.
And Skype gives you a sense of presence, of actually being there?
You do, because you're seeing them. You don't have to make up that you're in some other place or some other world to be with.
What does making up mean? Is writing a book or making music, is that also not making up?
It's creating. It's not making up.
So what's the difference between making up and creating?
Well, you're talking about interactions with somebody else. There's two different things. If I'm sitting there writing a book, I am creating a world for somebody else to have.
Exactly.
Yes, but I'm not expecting to interact with my own characters, somebody else in the way I interacted with.
Why not? Is it not a lot more suspenseful if I can create a world and then make other people visit that world and interact with them together? You're talking about being alone.
It's still not person to person.
Why is it not person to person?
It's not, because you're not being able to. If you're interacting through a screen, you're not being able to touch somebody. You're not being able to touch somebody. This isn't like Star Trek and their hologram deck.
Right.
Because it doesn't really exist. Because you're not really there.
When I talk to someone on Skype, it's through a screen. I'm not there.
It's true. But if you make up the world that you're around, it's still even farther fantasy. It's not reality. It is a created...
What is reality?
Well, we're real right now, but I'm not trying to be something I'm not, and that's what a lot of this stuff is.
Really?
Yeah.
So
if you're acting, let's say I wanted to go back to the Weimar period,
right,
and I'm acting something else. Right. That's not me. That's me. That's me acting somebody else's life.
Yeah, for the purpose of historical study.
But you can't historically study that way because you don't have the upbringing and the attitudes. You're not bringing those attitudes and upbringings to that person, than the person really who was alive at that time, because there were things that we know that they would have never known.
Right, so then history can only be studied by reading.
I'm not saying that. But I
I know you're not.
But you're asking
devil's
me.
advocate. Yeah.
But if you're asking me about Second Life, it's still as if you were going on to a theater on a big stage or in a big building or somebody recreating an era. You're not really reacting person to person. It's
Actually, you are, because you are reacting to another person.
You're reacting, but you're not really interacting with them because they're not. No, you're not.
You're collaborating.
That's not the same.
Why is that not the same?
Because there's a wall between. It would be like you being on the outside of my window and me being on the inside.
Let me tell you 2 more examples. Just try to envision those. If a woman who is in her 60s and who has multiple sclerosis and who cannot, on a good day she can walk, on a bad day she can't.
Yeah.
Inside herself, the way she sees herself, the way she envisions herself, she is a fully able-bodied person.
That's Avatar. That's the movie Avatar.
Exactly, and that is happening in Second Life right now.
That's great, but that's not her reality, though. That's the reality as she'd like to have her life be.
Right, so she should then.
She could also go back in Second Life and no, I didn't. That's not you're telling me that I'm saying something I'm not.
No.
I'm saying that if she wants to go in and become a 14-year-old on a website or in a web program, you're still in a website or a web program that was designed and written by somebody else.
I don't think
you can create that you can create yourself a new reality all you want, but once you log off, you have to go back to your life as it is.
In that specific case, I can tell you that she does not want to play a 14-year-old at all. She's a very accomplished woman with 3 grown children. All she wants to do is to not be judged by society based on her physical disability. And let me just finish real quick. And all that she also wants to do is to bring people together who are maybe socially isolated together with healthcare providers and talk about day-to-day issues. Some of these people, cannot drive 30,
but
50
you're assuming
miles
that
to...
the other person on the other end in Second Life is actually a true healthcare provider.
No, I'm not assuming that. I know that.
But no, you're actually assuming it because
no, I don't.
You don't. Because anybody can go on and create who they want to be on a situation like that.
Okay, if...
That's where I'm saying that it's not reality. You don't really know.
I actually do, because
you do, but I wouldn't.
You would, because you can...
How could you choose... How could you check credentials of people?
Do you know the Mayo Clinic?
I know what the Mayo Clinic is.
So if Virtual Ability, which is the group, if they announce Dr. XYZ from the Mayo Clinic or Tom Berlsdorf, anthropologist from UC Irvine, is going to come and speak to you about depression linked to physical disability, when there's an announcement on the Mayo Clinic website or on the UC Irvine website that Tom Berlsdorf, and here's a picture of him in real life, here's a picture of his avatar, then he appears and he speaks in his own voice, which is known through other means. Maybe you have spoken to him on the phone, or maybe he was on TV.
That happens to
I
be
think that's
one
verified.
situation, but it's out there that someone could possibly very easily.
A predator, a crazy person.
I'm not. That wasn't going to that point. I was going to put down that they were not a fake or a phony, a charlatan.
A charlatan, a snake oil salesman. I love that. Really great point. When this comes up, I always use the example of when I go down to Pavel's. Pavel seems like a nice guy. He makes good bread. How do I know who he really is? How do I know that? How do I know that he actually really is the benign bread maker and he's not a serial killer and has 500 people buried in his backyard?
Well, how do you know that he doesn't? But the thing is,
I will never know.
You only know me as a store. You don't know. How do you know?
You're right.
I'm not a serial killer.
Exactly. I don't.
have a half an acre of sandy loam. Nobody finds you.
See, but that's what I'm saying.
And it's on a podcast now, but that's a joke.
No, but that's what I'm saying. I think if you, this is not a foolproof way of leading your life, but I do think that common sense and intuition when you deal with another person, even if you're online, that's how I raise my children. Whenever you deal with anybody, if it's online, offline, wherever it is, you need to use your common sense. If I give them the tools to scrutinize that interaction and not be too naive about what another person's motive is, then I think I'm doing a good job. Last thing, because you said if it's not real interaction, it's not. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine there's an architect student. He's 21. He's in Egypt. A woman. She's her name is Nurhan. She's in Cairo, Egypt. She's an architecture student, 4th semester, and an architecture student, bride, blue-eyed American at USC. And they work together on a building that they're building for an open space in where the pyramids of Gizeh are. There's an open space right now that is going to be something, an open park or something. So these architecture students are tasked to do this together. Now, I'm telling you, they're on this virtual construction site, 30 of them. They fly around the building. They talk to each other as if they were standing side by side on the construction site. And they're putting stone upon stone. The Egyptian student says, no, I don't like that stone. I like it green. The American student says, but green, isn't that a weird color for Muslims? Oh, you must have cliches in your mind, says the Egyptian student. They're having a real conversation about cultural issues while they're sitting. Nurhan is sitting in her parents' apartment in Cairo, and Ben sits in his plush.
You are making stuff up, because I've been at the dorms at USC. They are not plush.
Well, maybe he lives also, in a more affluent, who can afford to go to USC, but that's another issue. All I'm saying is, let's think over what virtual versus real really means. What does real interaction mean? The music that you played yesterday, is that real?
Today it's not.
Good, you're good.
Music happens in the moment. That's why we like things like, that's why we like things like accounting. We can put double lines, but no, it doesn't. It's real in the moment because it changes every day. And the other thing that I'm seeing, I'm hearing, is all this stuff depends upon your ability to have certain levels of connectivity to things like the internet. And if you either have not the money, I see it as a social level thing, because if you either in this country don't have the money to pay for higher end, or you don't live in an area, like I don't live in an area, I'd have to have satellite internet, which I don't think, last time I had anything satellite, it wasn't the most reliable thing, and it's very expensive.
All right, there you have it. Pamela is putting her finger on so many good points, Joe. Essentially, she's saying that without having tried SL, mind you, that SL is not the holodeck, which would be cool, she seems to admit. And also she addresses the issue of broadband availability.
And it pretty much ruins the entire experience. So that is a big deal. But there is not much Linden Lab can do about that.
But how would you address somebody like Pamela here? How would you get her in?
She is absolutely right. Second Life, it is fake. And stop being in denial, Drax. It is not real. What we are doing, it is a sort of escapism. But the thing is, yes, she is right. But is it wrong? No. Escapism is not a bad thing, reading books, watching television, going to a movie, it is all a sort of escapism, and I don't see an issue with that. And of course, I would much rather enjoy visiting 1920s Berlin in reality. I would love to. I would throw my computer out the window if I could, but I can't. That is the big thing with Second Life. You can do things that you can't do in real life. And she is right when she says all those things that she can do in real life are a lot more fun than they are in Second Life. I completely agree. The thing is, Second Life becomes interesting when you can do things that you can't do in real life.
What I find interesting, though, that a Skype conversation, a phone conversation is considered real, and the rest in her mind is not real, and that she makes a difference between making stuff up and creating stuff. Isn't creating stuff making stuff up?
Well, it is the difference between writing a book and reading a book. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is both a lot of fun and it's both very interesting, and I think it is both a sort of creativity, but it is very different. But it doesn't mean that that you can't do one or the other. You can do both. Sure, there is a difference. I don't understand how Skype is any different than it is from Second Life, because you are still using, you can use your voice to chat to other people, but you do it in a fantasy world. And yes, it is all fantasy and it is all makeup and it is all fake, but, so what?
Well, this leads us to Nick Yee, research scientist at Ubisoft studying gamer behavior, and he recently wrote an article in Slate entitled "Virtual Worlds Are Real." Great to see that in the mainstream blogosphere. It sums up the thesis of Nick's book by the title of The Proteus paradox?
In the book, I think I was really interested in exploring the extent to which the virtual and the real operate separately or not. And the way that the media writes about these worlds, we assume that, virtual worlds, just because of how they're named, are disconnected, they're escapist fantasies. And so the book really goes in and challenges the psychological effects and impacts and why, in a way, our cognitive hardwiring doesn't change. And this is why, gender still matters, even though male and female avatars can do the same damage in World of Warcraft. Being Chinese mattered in World of Warcraft, even though national boundaries don't exist.
Lots of people still have that persistent problem having to divide virtual and real. Where does it really come from? In my experience, there is a fear attached to it that we somehow, if we engage too much with the online realm, we lose touch with the real world.
I think it's, with online games, it's so bound up with our moral panics on both the internet as well as video games. And, the moral panic around video games really started in the 80s when arcade games first showed up and they were just purely adult pastimes in bars and clubs. No one really cared or worried, but it was really when kids started showing up in arcades that there was this moral panic that these video games, like people were saying with rock and roll and with comic books, would turn, these innocent boys into violent criminals. And so I think with the virtual worlds, it really combined, these two separate moral panics on both video games and the internet, being antisocial and being, socially deviant. I think the media and I think, parents have latched on that kind of paranoia. We've kind of drawn up these lines that the physical is somehow good and wholesome, whereas the virtual is always suspect and deviant. Before the Second Life hype, essentially all the articles written about virtual worlds and EverQuest and World of Warcraft were either about its quote-unquote addictive nature or the fact that, oh my God, people are actually developing real romantic relationships online. And it was really that framing that I think helped perpetuate, these notions that why is all this stuff happening, in the virtual worlds and how can these real things be happening in these escapist fantasies? And I think there is a psychological comfort, and I kind of go in this in the book, where, we kind of tell fairy tales to children to help them cope with difficult real world situations. So there's the really good fairy godmother and this really evil stepmother. And it's not just a simple archetype, but that it kind of helps children cope with the multifaceted nature of people. Sometimes parents do get violently angry for a variety of reasons, and they become coping mechanisms. And I feel that when we talk about virtual worlds, the way we do this splitting kind of facilitates that kind of preserves this notion that the physical world is good and wholesome, whereas somehow in the virtual world is where all these bad people come out. And I think the more complex and true story is that, well, the bad people in virtual worlds live in the physical world. It's part of what I do in the book is I try to make those linkages that what makes these virtual worlds so fascinating is that our cognitive hardwiring in terms of, sexism, racism, and the way we treat each other, we carry over from the physical world.
Mm. If we're good, maybe we're better there. And if we're quote unquote evil, we're more devilish in these worlds because they give us that freedom? Is that too simplistic to frame it like that?
I think that's partly true. I mean, so let me give you, one example. We went to World of Warcraft. We were interested in what the effects of gender bending and stereotypes of what male and female players like to do in World of Warcraft. So we went and did a survey and asked World of Warcraft players what, here are a list of activities, crafting, tanking, DPSing, healing, and so forth. How much do you think a male or female player would stereotypically enjoy these activities? What do you think is the stereotype among MMO players? And so we found the most strongly stereotyped female player activity preferred in these games was healing. So we went in and we actually had access to the game server logs via the World of Warcraft Armory. And so we linked up survey data with in-game data, and we actually looked at the ratio of time that players actually spent healing versus not as a function of their physical gender as well as their avatar gender. So what we found was that the stereotype was false. So male and female players like to heal just as much. Where there was a difference was in avatar gender. So female avatars healed more than male avatars, and it was entirely a function of gender bending. So when male players gender bend, when they play a female avatar, they heal more. They conform to the healing stereotype. And when female players gender bend, when they play a male avatar, they heal less. Here's a stereotype. It's actually not true. But via play, World of Warcraft players were making this stereotype true in the game. So within World of Warcraft, you have this virtual reality where female avatars, female bodies, do appear to heal more than male bodies. So going back to what you were saying, that was part of what I was interested in talking about, that the stereotypes we hold, the assumptions we hold, we can make them true in these virtual worlds. And in this sense, these virtual worlds help perpetuate these stereotypes.
You guys are working with this data. How do we know that the ethnic background of these players, the socioeconomic background, how is that being researched so that you're really sure that this is the actual person behind that avatar?
Yeah, great question. We actually did this as part of a government grant where that accuracy was also important to them. And so we linked, first of all, we recruited World of Warcraft players via a survey. And then we went to the World of Warcraft Armory and we said, tell us all your character names. And then we went to the World of Warcraft Armory to make that linkage. On top of that, we did a kind of second factor verification. We asked them for their Facebook information, and we had students go and code their Facebook demographics independently of the survey. So they didn't see the survey demographics. We just said go to these Facebook names. We did this with a Facebook app. So we got their Facebook information via Facebook app. And we did coding to see, how consistent as, an additional verification on their Facebook information versus what they said in the survey. And for the most part, it was accurate. So, with age, some people, I think said that they were a little younger than they were, but with gender, there was very little mismatch.
Let's go to Second Life, what you did way back in, I think 2007 or so. My wife, who was my reporter colleague, aka Momi Dupre, did a piece on your Daedalus project. Did a little piece about why it is that in Second Life, where you can arguably present yourself any which way, people tend to go towards the Barbie and Ken model.
Yeah, I love Philip Rosedale's. He said, it could either be, I think, Mars or Malibu.
The numbers bear that out, that most people like to have a McMansion rather than something a little bit more off the beaten path.
For me, that's always been the elephant in the room. And it's, I think, one of those things that has been less talked about in the media when people talk about Second Life. In the book, what I say is, I think it's because the decadence comes so cheap. So in the physical world, it costs a lot to get a Gucci handbag. It costs a lot to have a perfect body, to be perfectly toned. But you can do that for pennies in Second Life. I think it's like going to a foreign country and finding the appeal of McDonald's. It's seeking out the familiar, but I think one step deeper than that is our entire social existence and our entire communal existence in the physical world is based on these status markers, and these status markers interact with each other, right? That having a good body and having the right clothes to show off that body, and all these markers are what our lives are made sense of in the physical world. I think it's easy to imagine one thing, but I think it's really hard to imagine a web of new social markers and new meanings of what that life would mean. It's why when people talk about, and this bugs the hell out of me, when people talk about, virtual conference rooms and virtual chairs and virtual tables, and why is it that, what's the point of building virtual worlds if we're just going to build virtual chairs and virtual tables? And I think part of it's really difficult to go up to business people and say, well, imagine you had a business meeting and you didn't have chairs and tables. How would you have that meeting? How would you structure that meeting? And I think we fall back on the familiar, and I think it's really those reasons.
And that is interesting that you mentioned it, because I also, I mean, this is just my own observation. I have no data to back this up, but it seems to me when I observe what's happening in Silicon Valley in particular, that some of this stuff is really going backwards. A year or so or 2 years ago, you saw all the big companies sort of bringing people back into physical offices so that they could, I guess, control them and watch over their shoulder. What are you doing? This is not really part of your research, but I was wondering if that you think that this goes hand in hand with a little backlash. I don't want to go off a tangent, but it feels to me that there's much more available to facilitate that in terms of telecommuting and such, and it's not being taken advantage of for whatever the reason is.
Yeah, I think there was a news about Yahoo, how they revoked their telecommuting policy. I think it's a couple of things. I think one thing was with the Second Life hype, and that was back in 2008, 2009. And everyone rushed in. I think the problem was because everyone was so stuck in the Malibu model, part of the backlash was due to that in the Malibu world, they really couldn't find, they were kind of stuck in terms of exploring what these virtual worlds were good and not good for. It's really no surprise to me that the answer was not virtual tables and virtual chairs. And I think once that happened, everyone was kind of like, well, maybe there's nothing there, and then everyone kind of left, and maybe to an extent the telecommuting backlash is part of that because we were so blinded by our own assumptions that we never could really explore what these worlds were good for. One thing I touch upon in the book is when Jaron Lanier first created his VR company, that he loved putting people in his lobster avatar, with 8 appendages, just to see how kids would adapt, to those bodies. And it's so, I remember thinking when I was in grad school and my advisor, Jeremy Bailenson, was talking about this in class, and we're like, wow, that's such a cool idea. I wonder what, other people and researchers are doing along those lines. And of course, there's very little being done along those lines. For better and worse, I think they're good reasons. I think, when in certain training and cultural immersion scenarios, there's very good reason to make it as realistic as possible.
Real quick, you mentioned in the article the Osama bin Laden avatar, just because it's such a curiosity with the media obviously latches onto that kind of stuff. I mean, is that just sort of the media, oh, here's an angle that we can explore virtual worlds?
I think for me what was so frustrating with both the December coverage of the NSA World of Warcraft link and the much quicker Osama thing was that both of those two stories fall back on the framing that these worlds are just escapist fantasies. And I think that's what really bugged me, So the New York Times Guardian stories, kind of open with, gee whiz, orcs and elves and NSA, and I think what was so frustrating especially in the New York Times Guardian articles was that there was no that was essentially the entire story, orcs, elves, NSA, how much money are they spending? And there was really no discussion about, why would the NSA, what's special about these worlds as novel communication platforms? And I think, as soon as people realize that they're novel communication platforms, then, well, of course, we're interested in how people communicate and the new affordances of these environments. And there was really no discussion of that in that article. It was really kind of a gee whiz article that kind of played on people's assumptions and presumptions about what these online games are. And so that I think that's what led me to write, the Slate and the Huffington Post articles. Was I was really trying to push back on that underlying assumption that, in a sense, I could care less about the Osama bin Laden, avatar, but it's really the assumptions underlying articles like that being written that are really frustrating.
What I was going to ask you mentioned that earlier a little bit. Every time I interview anybody from Second Life, they will always invariably say that they actually learn to appreciate, for example, nature and relationships in the physical world more. Now, that might be just, the people that I pick because I want to have positive examples, and I'm not denying that there's probably plenty of people who use worlds as merely escapist fare, just as many people read Daniel Steele novels back to back. But in your mind, I mean, just comment on how an engaged virtual life, quote unquote virtual, makes you appreciate your surroundings more?
That's a great question. I think in a lot of my research, I've kind of stumbled or found, we're not as free, or the experiences are not as transformative as they are. I think I have run across, in all the survey work, cases where that was not true, and I think the ones where they tend to not be true are people who have that introspection and are consciously able to think through both their virtual and offline experiences. So particularly, I think with people with some kind of physical handicap, that it does become a transformative experience for them. People who are actively exploring gender roles. They can be really fascinating experiences. And, in the book, there's a chapter on people who've fallen in love online. And I really wanted that chapter to be in there. One of the questions I asked these people who've fallen in love online and who are actually in a physical relationship, now offline relationship with these people they met online, do you think this relationship would have happened had you two first met face to face? And, I had a sample of, 120 players who are in those physical relationships. And about 60% of them said no. If they'd first met offline, face to face first, the relationship probably wouldn't have happened because they would have written the other person off because of some kind of, they weren't their type. They're too tall, too short, too blonde, too old, whatever. And it was the virtual world that let them know this person as a person first, rather than as a physical body first.
Now, with ethnicity, we touched upon a little bit. Did you do any research about ethnic background and how reinventing yourself in an online environment, how does that feed back to your life as an ethnic minority?
I did not look at that, but one of my colleagues at Stanford did. So her name was Victoria Groom, and I had just run my first Proteus effect study where we put people in taller avatars, and we noticed that they became more confident and they negotiated more aggressively in a virtual world. So her question was, well, what happens when we put white students in black avatars, and there are many, kind of theories in social psychology that, one of them is the contact hypothesis, right? That part of what reduces racism is simply how much you get to interact with people, with minorities in your everyday life. And so one of the things that she was trying to test was, well, if you put white students in black bodies, might that reduce their racial thoughts and attitudes? And it turned out that it didn't. It had the exact opposite effect.
Oh, no.
And I think in hindsight, it kind of makes sense. It's because suddenly you're brought into a situation where ethnicity becomes hyper salient. And so it triggers all your latent, thoughts that you may or may not be actively suppressing, but they all kind of get forced in the foreground. And so when she after, she put people in these black bodies, and she did, in psychology, there's a implicit attitude test, IAT, that tests your implicit racial attitudes, and it's a word association task. It tries to see whether you associate, a certain minority group with negative keywords, for example, via rapid button presses.
Mm-hmm. So give me an example. What would the word be?
So let me see if I can get this right. So your left finger and your right finger are on a keyboard, and you're supposed to react to very quick textual stimuli on your screen. One of those labels is the ethnicity, white or black. So one is on the left, one of them is on the right. And the other pair is a positive or a negative word, like a smart versus unintelligent. And they're paired differently, right? So positive, negative with both black and white, they're cycled through. And the issue is whether you react faster when it's consistent with the racial stereotype versus non-congruent with a stereotype. And so the stronger your implicit attitudes are towards ethnicity, the faster you respond when they're consistent, and the slower you respond when they're not consistent. And so it's been used in terms of age stereotypes and gender stereotypes as well. And so what Victoria did was she used this IAT after the immersion in the virtual world, and that's how she found out that the implicit attitudes actually got worse. And so, but I think part of what was happening was that the ethnicity was made to be so salient because of that interaction. When we ran the height studies, the height manipulation was so subtle that no one picked up on it when we did a debrief afterwards, when we said, guess what the study was about. No one could pick up on it. But in the race study, it was very obvious what the study was about. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to run, gender and ethnicity studies in a psychology lab is because liberal arts students are so primed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would imagine if they know what it is about, I mean, they can sort of self-censor themselves.
On the conscious level, they can, but I think what was difficult was on the subconscious level. It became really, really hard because all these cues were suddenly so salient.
Let's look into the future a little bit with all these hardware devices coming on, and where it will be easier to interact with an immersive environment. Maybe will be more mainstream that we actually all have avatars, like Philip Rosedale said 2007. will we, like email addresses?
I think that's a great question, and I'm always curious about the wearable versus the non-wearable solutions. What I'm really curious about is whether those tools will again just be used to virtual replications of the physical world, or will somehow, the availability of those tools, will it open up, sandboxes and places where people can actually play and create their own worlds, and whether that will lead to something more interesting. As a psychologist, that's been the most fascinating thing about these virtual worlds, is really how they reveal something really fundamental and important about humanity. And I think that's what's really fascinating, especially with Second Life and the way we adopt these tools, and how we don't adopt them when they kind of offer a open blank slate.
It seems the positions are very hardened in a way, don't you think? That will be my last question. What do you think? Are we moving towards a world that has been described in numerous sci-fi novels, where some people are going to completely unplug, get an acoustic guitar and live in a meadow, and others are completely plugged in and there's nothing in between? I have had many conversations with other parents. They say, oh, we're a tech-free household.
I wonder if part of the those backlashes are coming because I think the world is changing with these technology, with the internet and with these technologies faster, really, in the past 10 years than it has for, I think, a very long time, in terms of the deluge of information and the choices in terms of, well, even how you watch TV, right? And I wonder if part of that backlash is the uncertainty from this sudden sea of newness, and there's a sudden desire to again hold back on what's familiar. And I think there'll be multiple reasons for why people either latch on or detach themselves. At one point, I was writing about this whole, quote unquote addiction issue. Some people who really get sucked into, online games do so because, and I think Ted Casanova makes this point in his book, is that their offline lives are in fact quite bleak.
But we create that bleak world. Sorry, I go back to Orange County, where I have to go from the Hilton Hotel, go to the El Torritos, and then drive all the way around because I can't take a U-turn, and all I see is the John Wayne Airport 5-lane freeway and office parks. It's depressing.
Right, it is so depressing, and I think it'll be interesting to see how those tensions play out. I mean, as we make, as the have and have-nots, as that difference gets bleaker in the offline world, what happens in the online world? And is that a justifiable escape? And is that the reality that we're creating and encouraging? At the same time, as you just touched on, there is another class of people who can, in fact, afford to detach. And there are classes of people who can't afford to detach at all. And I think those tensions, will get real interesting if our world, keeps heading down the path that it seems to be heading in. And I think that whether virtual worlds become a escapist utopia or whether it becomes a reinforcing dystopia, I think becomes really interesting,
All right, so that was Nick Yee. Joe, what do you think?
Well, what I find so fascinating is that I somehow don't fit with any of the things Mr. Yee describes. My avatar looks like me in real life. I'm one of those boring people. I would use an office to have an office meeting, even if I can build whatever I like. I'm definitely not a Barbie. I use an avatar that's the same gender as I am. I'm a very boring avatar. That's what I learned.
You're destroying all research that has been done by Stanford and everybody else.
So sorry, but I understand because I am so fascinated by it as well. Because I'm in Second Life and walking around and I see all these Barbies and all these Kens, and I know that pretty much 90% of those people look nothing like that in real life. I want to grab them by the collar and say, I bet you look a lot more interesting in the real life instead of Barbie number 5622. But I won't because I'm, polite and all that.
We are running out of time and we depend on you. Don't forget, call us with ideas, recommendations for Linden Lab. How can they revamp the orientation, the onboarding? We know you have ideas. We will air a collage of voices. We have a super big scoop concerning Second Life next week. It's huge, I promise you.
I could care less.
Anyway, Furry Fair starts. I wrote this down. I have a soft spot for furries, so check that out. Joe, what else is new? What are you doing in virtual worlds this weekend? Anything?
I'm going to visit Dryland. Inara Pei wrote about it in her blog. I had a look and I made a few nice pictures that I added to the Flickr group.
Oh, I also forgot the Comcast Time Warner cable mergers concerning Americans. I put a link down there. The Senate Judiciary hearing is set for March 26. Please get involved. Goodbye, Joe, and I see you next week.
Auf Wiedersehen.
The Drax Files Radio Hour with Joe Yardley is a weekly production of Basic Tracks Entertainment. The show is supported by Ciara and Laval, Inara Pei, Daniel Voyager, Mona Aberhart, Victor Mornington, Justin Esparza, Strawberry Singh, Vintage Retro Historical Market Street, and Editorial Clarity. Special thanks to Pamela for providing the station ID this week. Contact the show via Skype Drax Files, Avatar Drax Files, or email radio@draxfiles.com.